Hello, and welcome to Devlog number 2. I was hoping to have some juicy updates to talk about, and I think I've managed to deliver. First, I've got a working title for the game, Adventures Untold. It's simple, flexible, and offers a place for the name of any potential expansions down the road. I like to daydream. With this name, I've also decided to use the term adventurer instead of character. I made that decision after recording all of the following footage, though, so you won't see that change reflected anywhere in this video. Without further ado, let's get into the rest of the exciting changes. Alright, so I've played a few games with a different layout for the shared supply. Instead of 3 base treasure cards and 10 random supply piles, I switched to 3 random treasure cards and 6 random other piles. I do like it quite a lot, actually, so I'm going to stick with that for now. I might play around with the number of treasure piles or the number of other piles in the layout, but for now, I really want to address the weird transition between the dungeon and the adversary. I've been using a dungeon meter that gets filled by killing minions to trigger the switch to the adversary, which is simple and it works, but the dungeon is engaging and exciting, and then you switch to the adversary and it just kind of falls off. I even got bored enough to just stop playing this game here after a few rounds of fighting the adversary. I don't know if that means I need to boost up the adversary deck or get rid of it altogether. I'm going to try a game or two where it is just the dungeon, and the point of the game is, instead of killing the final boss, to get a certain number of victory points, or get all of the victory points available, which changes based on the number of people in the game, number of characters in the game. So I'm going to make some modifications to the dungeon deck and try that out. As I started setting up a new game, I realized I forgot to mention that I've been experimenting with death mechanics, or maybe it should be called disabled mechanics or something, for when a character loses all of their health. So far, what I've been doing is that they have to trash all of their sustained cards in play. They lose their health meter and cannot be targeted, so all damage that they would have taken directly goes to a different character. I'm not sure I like it so much, but I do like the idea that the player is not really out of the game if their character reaches 0 health. I want the game to be engaging for everybody at all times. I might experiment with something a little more penalizing, or maybe with more restrictive gameplay instead of just redirecting damage, basically, and losing a few cards. I'll have to give that some more thought. I also need to figure out something to do with the distractingly shiny diamond, because I didn't touch it at all the past few games, and it just seems a little useless. You don't want to not play an action card during a turn and not tap any sustained card. Yeah, I gotta figure that one out. Next time I'm going to write down a list of talking points, because I also forgot to mention that after I try out this no adversary thing, I want to experiment with unlimited buys. So instead of being restricted to 1 buy unless a card gives you an additional one, you can just buy as many cards as you want to and have the money available for, as well as being able to buy cards at any point during your turn instead of a specific buy phase after your action phase. Okay, so when I said I was going to make some changes to the dungeon deck, all I really did was shuffle most of the adversary cards into the dungeon deck. There were a few I left out because they didn't make any sense without an adversary target. Depending on how this game goes, I want to look into some sort of difficulty ramping mechanic for the dungeon deck if there is no adversary, because the original point of having a dungeon deck and then an adversary deck, aside from the aesthetics or trying to recreate an MMORPG dungeon experience, was so that you use the time spent facing the dungeon deck, which consists of less challenging opponents, to build up your deck to a point where it is strong enough to face the adversary. But if there is no switch in difficulty like that from the easier dungeon deck to the more difficult adversary, who is currently up there in a corner hiding away. Poor guy. I want or probably need some sort of ramping mechanic for the difficulty. Kind of like Aeon's End, where you create the adversary or whatever they call it deck from 3 tiers of difficulty. Obviously, I don't want to copy that mechanic wholesale, but I do want to, as I'm playing this, think about how I can add some method of ramping up the difficulty as the game progresses. Alright, so I just finished up the first game with only the dungeon. It took about an hour and 10 minutes. As you can probably see, I died. My final score was 11, so I was about halfway to winning since I've been capping it at 20 victory points. The dungeon deck definitely seemed a lot more difficult with the adversary cards that I added into it. There are a few adjustments I can make to help with that. I've been drawing 2 cards on each dungeon turn because it was too easy with just 1 card. I figured with 2 to, 4 players, I could draw 2 cards instead, but I might have to stick with 1 card for 2 players. I don't know, I'm gonna think about that. I do think I like it better with just the dungeon deck. It's not as I can't find the right words to describe my problem with the adversary and that gap, that dissonance between the 2 decks, but I think it did better without it. I do want to try and find a method of progressively increasing the difficulty of the dungeon deck, because I think that would have helped out greatly. Let me build up my character decks a little bit before getting hit with the large stuff. I got a large toxic blob. Let's see if we can find that one. I got a large toxic blob pretty early on, as well as toxic enrichment, and they hit hard. One idea I have right now is to change some of the numbers on the dungeon deck cards to be based on a player level, and the player level would be based on the number of victory points the players have earned. So maybe every 10 victory points the players would go up a level, and the dungeon cards would become more difficult based on the level. It seems a little difficult to keep track of, or annoying, not difficult, just annoying to keep track of that, but I might give it a shot. The next game I play, I definitely like the idea of no limit on the buys, because that would help ramp up the decks faster, and money is in somewhat short supply, so you don't want to waste it. If you have 5, but you want to buy, say, blood money to get more money into your deck, that only costs 2, and it feels like a complete waste of the remaining 3. So that's the next change I'm going to try. I might make some changes to some of the dungeon deck cards first, make them a little easier, but I'm mostly going to be thinking of ways to progressively ramp up the difficulty of the dungeon deck throughout the game. Okay, so I played through with unlimited buys and no strict buy phase, and I actually won a game. It was close, as you can see. There's only 5 health, and I'm at 17 toxicity, and this guy is at 19 toxicity. So a couple more rounds, and they probably would have both been too toxic to continue, or in Firebrand's case, dead. I forgot to replace that, but it doesn't matter because it won me the game. Well, Molten Forge combined with Deny the Heretic won me the game to kill the flesh-eating flower and get me the last shit. So technically I might not have won, because normally the flesh-eating flower would only give me 1 victory point, and I was at 18. Oops. I might even just adjust flesh-eating flower though, because it deals a lot of damage for only giving 1 victory point. By the way, I've been calculating the number of victory points received from minions by dividing their health in half and rounding down. Anyway, I really like having unlimited buys. I think it fits really well in the game, so I'm going to need to adjust some of the cards that give additional buys. I definitely need to think of a way to ramp up the dungeon deck because it's tricky in the beginning. It was a very tight game. There's a good chance we would have died because, as you can see, there are no enemies on the board, which means no way to earn victory points, even though I did play Focusing Orb for the first time ever. There would have been no way to win until the dungeon took its turn, which probably would have killed us. The cats are having fun playing with each other underneath the door. So yeah, I'm going to take some time to think of a way to ramp up the dungeon deck. I'll probably also make some more changes to the dungeon deck now that it's combined and go from there. As I was working on this devlog, I realized that despite being featured in all of the footage in this video, I failed to mention that I had added a second class to the game, as well as a character for that class. The class, Lightbound, is the cleric slash priest slash paladin hybrid class of the game, and the character is the Templar. He's a bit of a fanatic, but then again, so are most of the Lightbound. I just started working on the second character for the Lightbound class, as well as a third class, but I will have more on that in the next devlog.